Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Smart Speakers. Today is our first interview with a human guest. His name is Phil Markunas. He is the co-founder and CTO of a conversational voice company called Standard Practice. I met Phil in New York City at a conference. In a series of coincidences, we found out that we were both working on voice AI. Then we found out we both live in Brooklyn. Then we found out our kids go to the same school. And actually, I just saw him because our daughters are working on a science fair project together. It's been
amazing.
wonderful. It is amazing. It's
What
been
a small
wonderful to get
voice
to know
AI
him.
world it is.
Yeah, shockingly small, also shockingly nice. Very excited for y'all to get to listen to him. He's one of the smartest speakers in the space on voice AI.
Without further ado, here is Phil Markunas. Phil, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here. This is amazing.
We're really glad you're here. And my name is Dave Z. I'm joined by none other than...
Can I go with Harish? Is that okay?
It feels like it sounds like harder to say than Harish Agarwal, but I'm not sure.
We'll just go
Regardless,
with
Phil's here.
Harish.
Phil is the co-founder and CTO of Standard Practice. And we're so glad you're here, Phil. So I've actually changed up the icebreaker a little bit, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, I was so ready. Okay, let's go.
Okay, what was your first or most recent aha moment with AI where you're just like, whoa?
I think when I had my first emotional response to AI, which was very strange for me, what we do in our office all the time is we're just testing all the time, like any engineering team. And so this amounts to just saying weird things to AI, sometimes yelling at the AI. And so I was testing one time. Our AI's name is Eva Jones. And so I was like, hey, she was like, hey, this is Eva Jones. I'm like, your name's not Eva. She's like, yes, it is Eva. And I was like, oh my gosh. It actually got me a little bit. I was like, in the tone of it. And I had like a real response. I felt bad. I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It was just
Wait,
messing
it's
with
a
you.
machine. Yeah, I had her moment, like the movie, where I just had like a real response to the AI, and that was strange, but good. I was like, oh, this really works.
That's amazing. And I totally broke your testing mode where just yelling at the AI the rest of the time.
Totally broke. I was like, I can't do this. I gotta take a break, have a coffee. I'll come back.
That's so funny. Thanks for sharing that. I love that your AI has a first and last name, which I feel like is
Yeah, of course.
somehow underappreciated here. Okay, I'll ask the other icebreaker too. So our original icebreaker, because Harish and I have been exploring apps in the health space, is what's your guilty pleasure food?
Sure, that's an easy one for me. Definitely Oreos.
Ooh.
I don't measure Oreos in cookies. I measure Oreos in lines of Oreos. I'm gonna do one line of Oreos. Which is great. And when I was younger, I used to just run a lot. I'm like, okay, I'll just run it off. But now I'm getting older. I'm like, man, I can't, I don't have time to work out as much. I was talking to Harish about this. I'm very excited about your calorie counter and nutrition. Because I just started my own Odyssey calorie counting in December.
Amazing.
And I count every calorie, and it's really opened my eyes to just what it means, the food around us and the life choices that I make. Honestly, I wasn't really aware of the choices I was making. And it's been really fun.
That's
It's not
awesome.
the first time I've done this. Yeah. I lost 40 pounds in 3 months twice in my life.
Oh my
Wow.
God, amazing. Wow.
Yeah, which is really, I was about to say fun. It's fun in a way, but the first time was when I moved to Japan.
Mhm.
Just the portions were really small. And my body adapted to the environment, and I just
That's
lost a ton of
interesting.
weight.
That's amazing.
And the second was more obvious, was basic training.
Okay.
That'll do it in the
Yeah.
army.
I'm sure. Can I ask, are you a regular Oreos guy or a Oreo Thins or double stuff?
Well, that's a deep question there,
Just
my
Halloween
friend.
Oreos.
Personal favorite, deep favorite would be double stuff peanut butter
Wow,
Oreos.
peanut butter.
Wow.
Yeah, peanut butter is really good. I also like vanilla birthday cake. Those are really good.
You're a connoisseur.
So you mentioned basic training, which leads me to my next question here. So you served as a veteran in the Army. I feel like, at least for the circles that I run in startups, that's kind of unusual in our corner of the tech world. And so I'd love to hear about how your time in the military kind of influenced your approach to, how you work.
It definitely has profoundly affected how I think about leading small teams. Because for me, that as an NCO, non-commissioned officer, that's really what it was about. Ended up as a staff sergeant in the military police corps. I'm very happy about that. I guess the main thing that I learned is that people are the most important. That's it. Like what our company is really in the end. They're groups of people. We put all these fancy names around it, like, hey, has this structure, this hierarchy, or these goals and KPIs, but it's really people. It's people who come together for a common purpose. And so taking care of the people first is the right answer. There's no other answer there. So that's where it all comes from.
That's awesome. And so you feel like you've been able to put those lessons from your time in the military into practice when you're running your company?
Absolutely. I hope my people think I put people first. So that's them.
Yeah, we're gonna do a follow-up episode where we get some Oreos and do taste testing, and then also ask your people whether you put them first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in putting people first, I'm really big on transparency and kind of no BS. I would never ask anyone to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. So if there's a task that isn't the most fun, I try to lead from the front and do it myself first and show that I'm, and be an example. I also try to not take credit because I think particularly in the startup world, we like to tell this story where it's like, oh, the genius founder who did all this stuff. I'm not a genius. I just work hard and I'm supported by a team. And it's always a team. There's never a single time really probably in the history of humanity, that a single person has done anything by themselves. We are a group, and I think it's important to remember that.
It sounds like that sort of mentality is something that, because I think, like putting emphasis on people and putting people first, a lot of people will say that when they're leading teams, but you're giving examples of a mentality that, maybe was sort of like borrowed from your time in the military, or you kind of like cultivated there and brought over.
That's what I try to do. I hope I'm not perfect either. And so I don't always, but that's what I try to do every day.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's great.
You mentioned living in Japan. It sounds like you've lived a lot of different places around the world. Is that right?
That's right.
That partly because of the military stuff, or
combination of things, of kind of crazy parents, lived a lot, and then me being a crazy adult, moving a lot initially, and also military. So kind of common. I've lived and worked in 3 foreign countries. I've been very lucky to have had a lot of really amazing experiences. And I guess my move count lifetime is approaching 60. I'm well over 50. I just stopped.
That's so much.
That's you got to be on the far tail of the distribution here.
I really hope so for everybody's sake.
Hope so for everyone else out there. What was your favorite place to live?
Well, I mentioned Japan before. So Japan has really become a second home to me. Initially, I lived there for 2 years, and it was really great. I didn't speak a lick of Japanese when I showed up, just taught myself, never really took a class, kind of learned it on the street, drinking mostly, really, to be fair. It's just great. Super fun. I did end up marrying my wife in Japan. She's Japanese when I was in Japan, and we came back. And so I end up I spend all my vacation time going to Japan. I work remotely from there a little bit every year if I can. And so it's definitely become my second home.
So were you living in Tokyo, or?
I was living in Takamatsu, which is the largest city on the smallest island in Japan. There are kind of 4 main islands. Most people know Honshu, which is kind of the main one in the middle, where Tokyo and Kyoto and Osaka and all those places are. And then right underneath it is the smallest of the 4 main islands, called Shikoku. And I lived in the biggest city in Shikoku called.
That's great. I did not know the I did know that there was one main island, but I didn't even know about how big is the largest city on the smallest island?
That's a good question. I think they're pushing like 800,000 in
Okay, so
the
it's like a
kind of
reasonable size
core
city.
area,
Yeah.
but it looks like Times Square. Like Japan, something like only something like 67% ish of the land in Japan is actually arable or farmable. Most of it is kind of volcanic, these kind of small volcanic mountains or hills. And so the population, it's a population that's, I forget, about 125 million. And so it's about a third of the US, and it's crammed into the space the size of California. But California with like, you can only use two-thirds of the land.
That's wild.
I was told when I went to Takamatsu that it was the middle of nowhere. And I got off the train and it was Times Square, just neon and
Whoa.
people and crazy. And
Yeah.
so it was super fun, really, really game changer.
That's amazing. Middle of nowhere means something different in Japan, I guess.
Very different. It
Yeah.
was really crazy.
Well, how did you end up getting into startups after the military?
So I started off as a technical product consultant for kind of Fortune Global 500 companies like Microsoft, Samsung, WeWork. WeWork was Fortune 500 company then, I think. Not anymore,
Yeah.
but it was great. And mostly I was building kind of skunkworks projects for really large corporations, global corporations, where I would go in behind the scenes with a small team, cut the red tape, and make something new and cool that they had a hard time kind of getting through their hierarchy. And so it was really fun. But I guess in the end, what I really loved about the job was building big things with small teams. And I was like, hey, I think I could do this at startups. That's like what they're all about. And so I was really happy to shift over to startup, became like a senior technical product manager at a global hotel software company. That was really fun. And then head of product at DevPost, the world's largest hackathon platform.
Awesome.
And then I'm my co-founder and built a couple companies there. So that was really cool too.
That's amazing.
So you mentioned a couple of companies. Yeah, I find the story of standard practice to be really fascinating. It wasn't always standard practice. Can you talk about kind of the origins where you all started?
So we started off with a company called Nibble Health. And so I met my co-founder, Stephen Grain, through a friend of a friend. He was doing kind of healthcare M&A and research at Goldman Sachs. And he was also working at 30 Madison, which is another kind of healthcare startup. And he asked one of his buddies, he was like, hey, I need a co-founder. And then my buddy said, hey, I know this guy. He's a Swiss Army knife. His name is Phil. And that was me. Because I'm the head of product and CTO as well. So, I do the design and engineering and have a background and have a master's in learning, background in AI. So it's like, hey, I could do this. Let's do it. And our first company was called Nibble Health. It came from an experience that we've all had, and I've had too. But specifically, Stephen was reacting to his wife had like chest pains one night and just had to go to the emergency room. And they did like a quick CT scan, like quick X-ray. She chatted with the doctor for like 15 minutes. They were out of there in like under an hour. And a few days later, they got a bill for like 5,000, which is really crazy.
That's nuts.
It's super nuts. So as we all know, healthcare in the US it's good, which I'm happy about, but it's so expensive. It's wildly expensive. And so we created Nibble Health as an employee benefit to help deal with this, put a dent to this problem. And so it was a credit card that all employees at a company would get, bright green card, cool, you have it in your wallet. And whenever you have a healthcare expense, say you go to the dentist for $1,000, also an expensive spot usually for folks, you can swipe your Nibble card and pay $0 today. Pay zero, and then pay off that $1,000 in small chunks over time, up to 12 or 18 months, with no interest and no fees. And so this was similar to an HSA card, but actually way more useful because
Yeah.
HSA, you have to put money into it beforehand. Most people don't, but you have to use it at very specific places for very specific things. Our card was literally just a credit
It's a
card.
credit card.
I
Yeah.
mean, no money up front. It was a credit card that was free to use. We're really
Yeah.
just using credit card rails to help people pay for it.
Every time I've had an HSA card, I stopped using it eventually because I could never get it to work, at any of the places where I expected it to work. So was it a deliberate choice to build on the credit card rails and try to make the tech more accessible to everybody?
That's exactly right. So, I looked at using all sorts of things from HSA card to prepaid cards to anything and everything under the sun. Corporate cards, you could kind of finagle it, but really a consumer facing credit card associated like banking infrastructure ended up being the easiest for people. It all comes down to the problem like at point of sale. So like if a doctor says, "Hey, you owe me $1,000, people generally don't know that you can legally say no. You actually don't have to pay right away.
I did not know
But
that. So
Yeah, I had no
yeah,
idea.
you don't. In fact, like debt kind of regulation around healthcare debt is very different than other types of debt or payments. And you can actually not pay for quite some time with zero negative consequence to your credit score or anything else. So you have time to negotiate it down, really do the research and kind of push on it. Or, pay with, in our case, pay with a different method later, but no one really knows that. And so that sort of educational hill climb was too much. And so we bit the bullet. We built a banking infrastructure and credit card from scratch and got it to market. And it was really fun.
That's incredible. It sounds like it was a good product, it was a good solution. And I know that at some point you ended up pivoting the company towards standard practice. Can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Nibble Health, I would say, was a qualified success in the end. Qualified by the fact that we pivoted to a different company, but we raised over 8.5 million from leading VCs like Tiger Global, Axa, A-Star, some other folks, which was really great. We ended up building what I considered to be a best-in-class product, and built, what I mentioned before, the banking credit card infrastructure and a beautiful like cross-platform iOS and Android app that was really great. Uh, we were used by over 10 employers and hundreds of happy employees, so really great. But I think one of the issues was it was 2022, and so there was a bit of a crash at that point. The macroeconomic headwinds were against us. Our business was very capital intensive. And at that point, capital was very expensive. So we had to, it's interesting when you build a credit card from scratch, you realize it's not magical. It's bank account and money behind the scenes. It's complicated, but it's not magic. And you need money to lend, to spend to a merchant to pay for things. And so very capital intensive business, the cost of capital is very high. Interest rates are very high. And also with the kind of crash in the VC market as well, our investors were looking for more immediate returns or impact, and which all this makes sense. And at the end of my time, our time at Nibble, I was building a product called Simple Bill, which was really fun. It was, and I believe still is, the first customer-facing medical bill analysis tool, where in our app, you could take a picture of your medical bill. We built an ML model that could dynamically pull the metadata from the bill, no matter what the format. Medical bills come in wildly different formats, which is crazy, but we could pull it reliably, which was really great. And then we hooked into national and local data sources to tell people a few things about their bill, a dynamic immediately after they upload the image. We could tell people for each procedure that they received, how much they paid relative to other people in their area for that exact procedure. Because crazily enough,
very cool. Yeah.
very often doctors don't even know. In fact, they don't even know what they're charging usually, but
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a different
We've been talking
issue.
to some healthcare providers, and a lot of them, especially in a larger setting, have no idea how, they're not exposed to the billing or coding or whatever, right?
No way. It's super wild. So we could, but people wanted to know, like, you get this bill,
Yeah, of
you don't
course.
even know if it's expensive or not. Like, it's a very black boxy, kind of siloed industry. And we wanted to break that open a little bit. And so I built a product where we could tell people, hey, this is how much you paid relative to other people around you for this procedure.
Right.
And we also could analyze the bill according to national coding standards and tell if there are any errors, and that, hey, go to your doctor, give them this information, and they can correct your bill for you. And ultimately, they could also pay with their Nibble card if they wanted to as well. People really loved this product, so I was really happy about it. But what it did was it got me in touch with medical back office professionals. So I was talking to them every day, medical billers, back office folks doing the paperwork. Hey, how does it work? What do the medical bills look like? All this. And I'm a technical product person. So what I did, like, I always ask people, hey, what's your big problem? Like, if you could press a big red button and solve any problem, I can solve any problem for you. What do you want me to solve? And I was a little shocked that they all said talking to a chair, that they literally spend 5-6 hours a day, most of it on hold, talking to insurance. You get to someone, they don't have the right answer. You get transferred 3 times. Just like we all experience when we call any customer support, or God forbid you actually call insurance, you'll experience it as well. And so that was their biggest problem. And with us looking to pivot with the macroeconomic headwinds that were challenging for us, in my background in ML and AI, it also coincided with the release of GPT 3.5, which was a game changer. And so when I had this problem that I was seeing every day, or that people were telling me every day, and I saw GPT 3.5, I was like, I don't know exactly how to solve this, or even if we can solve it, but let's try. I think this can do it. And that's what startups are all about. It's basically a very beautiful experiment. It's a quest.
Yeah.
See if this works.
So,
and so that's where it began.
So GPT 3.5 had come out, which, at this point, it's been a while. And I think it's fair to say that technology has changed somewhat rapidly even since then. At that time, I don't remember voice or voice AI being on my radar, at least. What kind of led you to think about voice, wrapping GPT 3.5 as sort of a viable solution or was that even where you started? Were you always thinking we could do the call, or were you thinking we might be able to go around it somehow?
That is where we started. We started with the call.
Yeah.
Because the people I was talking to every day, it still was a call. That's one. Two, I did some market research as usual, and found there actually are already some pretty good solutions out there for portal automation and things like that. And so that's already somewhat covered. And so the call was really kind of a new solution that no one had ever really gotten into yet, or at that point. Now there are a bunch. That's not too much at that point. There were some companies that used traditional NLP, natural language processing, to do similar calls. I have some buddies that like Splang AI who do that for a restaurant. There are companies like Infinitus that did it for healthcare. I saw that with LLMs that we could create calls that were way more natural and way better with a much smaller team than was ever possible before. And you're right, I didn't know if it would work or not. And so we built it fast. We built an MVP. We actually got to market in under 4 months from
It's incredible.
Just the idea to actually being in market with live customers. So we built small, built fast, and it worked. Yeah. So I was happy about that.
Yeah, you said something that I want to come back to. You said, you weren't sure if it was going to work. And I think, so Dave and I have been through this a few times where in the beginning, yes, the whole enterprise of building a startup, you don't know if it's going to work. And then there is a point where you feel like it's working. And maybe there's a moment or an event that happens where you're like, oh, wow, this kind of like crazy bet that I made, maybe it's going to pay off. when did you feel that? Like, when did you think, like, I think we can pull this off?
I mentioned that emotional response at the beginning of the call. That was definitely a moment when I actually had a real like human response to, what is effectively a machine. I think that was a moment where I saw like this
It's going to
is
work.
actually changing the game and that I feel like it's going to work. That as well as I think the big problem around LLMs in particular, and people talk about this a lot, is that they're not like their strength is their weakness. Their strength is that they provide a very dynamic, very beautiful kind of human experience. That's also their weakness because as engineers, that type of response is fancy word, not idempotent, aka it's not predictable. You don't know what's going to happen every time. And so the strength is the weakness. And so I think um, so two things. One, when I had that response, human response to it, I knew this is good. This can work. And then two, when we were able to scale it up to thousands of calls, which took some doing and some kind of finagling, that's when I knew that it could work when we got high success rates that are predictable in a very complex environment. Healthcare.
It's incredible. Yeah. Congrats on shipping such a great product. It's awesome.
Thank you.
In our chats, the three of us, outside of this podcast, one thing that you've mentioned, which I want to come back to, and it's related to this, idea of navigating a complex workflow. You've talked about voice conversation, while you have solved it or are solving it for this specific use case, the kind of like generic problem of voice conversation, you've talked about it as being an AGI level problem. Do you still believe that, or, can you kind of get into that viewpoint a little bit?
I think it's very similar to kind of Elon Musk. We all know with Tesla came out every year. It was like, oh, this is the year self-driving. And then it was always next year and then next year and next year. And we're kind of getting close to it now, with Waymo and, Tesla kind of automated robo-taxis are coming soon. We're close, but it took that long. And so driving, as an example, seems like a very simple thing. It's like, hey, stay on the right side of the line, stop when it's red, go when it's green. Seems really simple, but in reality, there are times when you need to break the law for safety reasons. If a kid walks out in front of your car, you can bet I'm going in the other lane of traffic or doing what I have to do not to hit that. I'll tell you what. And so that's just one example of a myriad of use cases and issues. So like self-driving, what ends up seeming very simple is actually an AGI level problem. I think human conversations actually are quite similar. And for us, it seems really simple. Hey, call an insurance provider and get the answer to these 10 questions. That's simple, right? But in reality, it's quite complicated. You ask one question, and then there are three clarifying questions. And then how do you take the new information that you get from these clarifying questions, bring it back to the main thread in an intelligent way, continue pushing down the line, but you have to do so in a flexible human way. And then sometimes you have to break off of kind of your flow and ask these other questions. How do you even know? And then that's not even getting into things like intelligent pushback or fighting for a better price, or how do you know when the person you're talking to in insurance actually knows what they're talking about? These are
I'm sure it comes up
things,
more than you would like to imagine in that context, right?
Unfortunately, yes, although there are some great folks out there as well, of course, but
I'm sure.
it does come up a lot. Unfortunately, the reps that we're talking to, they're kind of regurgitating the information that they're given. And sometimes that is wrong. And there are kind of logical flaws in it. That itself is a very difficult problem to identify logical flaws in a highly localized system that's different in not only in every state, but very often in every city, there are differences. You call every payer, and every payer has a different IVR menu and different standards and different codes that they use. And so it ends up just navigating this in an intelligent way is a vastly complicated problem, which I would offer maybe an AGI level.
Yeah, I mean, that rings true. Anything that you kind of dig into is way more complicated than it might seem at a surface
Oh my
level.
gosh. As like, as engineers, fellow engineers on the call, one of my engineers told me this, or that you don't really understand something unless you can code it. And I kind of like that in the
Yeah.
sense of like using a simple example, like, hey, go pour yourself a glass of milk and drink it. Seems easy, right? But like, okay, like how much do you fill it up? Do you fill it up all the way to the top? Or you're going to wobble a little bit. Oh, what angle should your arm be? If it's actually really full, you have to change the way you drink. If it's really empty, you have to drink it like this. It's actually all these things that we take for granted, all these human experiences that we've refined over thousands of years, including human conversation, are extremely difficult to mimic in a life like
Yeah, I mean, watching my kids navigate a glass of milk has totally convinced me that it's an AGI level problem. So I'm with you there. But
It's always one year
given
away, Harish, that they'll drink the glass of milk without spilling it. So
maybe
next year, I think
before
it's going to be
they
the
move
year.
out, they'll figure it out, you know? Um, given
then they'll
given that
get
it's
some
an
other problems
AGI,
with that.
given that it's such a complex problem, and it sounds like you're well aware of the limitations. How are you designing the tech, the product to work around some of the current limitations, some of the current capabilities in voice AI?
Well, I think, as always, I think a product is only as good as its information flows. And so the quality of the information that we get allows us to iterate faster and to create higher quality output. And so, that's partly why I really push to build a really small product and get it out really fast, 4 months from idea to in market. For me, that's the key, is getting folks on and using it. And that's where you really cut past the BS and to like, hey, does this really solve the problem? And so we do it by getting as much information as possible from our customers in all kinds of different ways. Like usual, we have an analytics system where we quantify the quality of our calls in lots of different ways. We also have alerting systems when things go off the rails. We have benchmarks over time so that we know how the quality of each call and call type, including each payer as well. We have, I think, a lot of designing these calls has been more about taxonomy, like data taxonomy, than I ever thought, aka the hierarchical organization of information. Because let's pretend together. Let's pretend
I'm ready.
that, let's do it. Let's pretend that, you want to make a call. And so everyone always comes up to me and says like, oh yeah, AI is easy, right? You just make a prompt, just prompt it up. And then I'm like, okay, try doing that and then see what happens on your very domain specific, long running, 45-minute long phone call with multiple transfers. See how it goes. And then you come
I
back to
hope
me.
everybody hears the emotion, can detect the emotion in Phil's voice. OpenAI could not detect that emotion properly, but I can detect that emotion.
That's right. That's right. And so for us, a lot of it's about data taxonomy. So you can't just jam it all into one big prompt, into one big thing. There has to be prompting and fine tuning and sort of different models used for different tasks. And so with time, we are getting more and more surgical about the stack that we use, about the prompts that we use for very specific scenarios. And we're starting to automate that process as well. So feeding that data back into the system, automatically creating new prompts, A/B testing it versus others, using all this, analytic system that we've stood up, which is super exciting.
That sounds awesome. Is most of this like homegrown tooling that you're using that like kind of like has evolved as you've made more and more calls? So like for the evaluation, for example?
Definitely started off more homegrown
Okay.
because when we started, there wasn't like most of this actually didn't exist, which
Yeah.
is crazy. So we ended up building a lot of things because we were one of the first folks doing this. We ended up building a lot of things that didn't exist in the market. That being said, more and more there are players out there who can provide services for some of the things we built, and we're slowly switching over. We don't want to build everything from scratch, like try building a web server from scratch sometime. No, thank you. And so we'll let someone else do that. And so that we can really focus on our core problem of making really great healthcare calls at scale.
This is maybe in the weeds in terms of implementation, but how do you manage the state of the call? Like if there's 10 pieces of information and 3 sub pieces per piece, but do you have something like lane graph or something that you're using to manage where you are on that state chain?
We do use LangGraph. We were around before LangGraph, so we used LangChain, and we were actually having state problems, and we built some of our own tooling around that. And then LangGraph came out. We're like, aha, thank you, LangGraph.
Yes.
And LangGraph specifically sort of has allowed us to change the way that we think about agentic systems. And it's really quite a change the game, I think. It's really
Yeah. How do you see that changing over time?
we started off with kind of like what we call a big node or a big prompt where we have like one big old prompt and there's still data taxonomy where we loaded things in dynamically for different calls and things like that, but it's kind of a big prompt that required a very big model, something like for GPT-4 something like that, llama 70 billion. These things can handle of these more complex situations, but at the cost of latency and dollars as well. It's more expensive. And so we're changing the way that we do things. Instead of being kind of a big prompt or what we call big node, we're building smaller nodes. So this allows us to do lots of really cool things. It allows us to programmatically control the flow between these nodes.
Mhm.
It also allows us to build more specialized agents and tooling that can deal with very specific scenarios and situations. This also allows us to use much smaller models that are much less expensive and have much lower latency. And so that's the model that we're moving to. I think LangGraph for us is what I used to call like an expressive logic layer. I knew when we first started building, that's what we needed. We were overloading the LLM. We're putting the whole prompt in there, all this domain specific knowledge. We're asking it like, hey, also like know when to hang up and also know when to look up information and also like do all these other logical things. Don't ask these questions, ask these other questions another time.
Right.
It's just too
It's
much.
too
It
much.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of kind of intrinsic logic to human speech and language that, as engineers, I think we're more familiar with. Like what's a programming language? It's breaking down data and logical flows into very discrete steps. And that's something that natural language, aka that's what we write prompts in, and that's what LLMs deal with. That's what they like. It's not good at logic. LLM because the web of logic is too complex. Like here, you're telling it to, be very careful about these kinds of questions. Other times you're saying, hey, get past that IVR, like because it's too long. How is it supposed to decide? And so we're in the process of making our agentic systems much more idempotent, robust, and programmable.
Sounds amazing. Sounds like a lot of fun to work on.
Super fun. Actually, I love it.
And what's next for the company? It's just it sounds like you're making this big change to improve the systems. Is that like kind of the ongoing project of just breaking it up into smaller models and improving the reliability of each piece?
That is kind of the big push. I would say that, really changes the game is actually moving towards more of an AGI-like experience that will have much more nuance and be much faster. I think the other one that we're working on that I touched on a little bit is kind of scalability through quantification. Because like how can you judge if a human conversation is a good one? Sure, we have metrics. We can have like time to first token, you can have latency, total token, there's all these. You can have hallucination rate, accuracy, things like that. You can use, and we do all these things. So we can use LLM as judges to make evaluators. That's a little scary because it's like LLMs.
Yeah, turtles all the way down. Yeah,
exactly. Turtles all the way down. But I think one thing that we're having trouble with, and I think everybody does, is to still really judge if a call went well. You still need a human because it's too complex. Like there's pronunciation, there's intonation, there's cadence between people, there are interruptions. Sometimes interruptions are good, sometimes they're bad. And so I have a very silly term for this internally. I call it, I'm particularly concerned about success but doof calls because there are all these moments that are like doof, like you said that number weird, doof, but
that's
like
so funny.
Success,
yeah, like it got it done, but it sounded wrong or did something like embarrassing.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Like, hey, we got the call, like by every metric that you can look at, it was 100% success. It was great. But if you listen to it, occasionally, like most of the time it's good, but occasionally you'll get those success but doof moments where it's like,
yeah,
you could have said
Eva
that
Jones.
one better.
Don't make Phil yell at you again,
That's right. You don't want to do that. Don't elicit an emotional response from him.
Yeah.
And so that's one really exciting thing that I'm excited about is to add to our quantification analytical layer to try to really quantify like what doof means, like what happens when can we even identify it. And so that will allow us to be much more scalable and to continue to increase the speed and accuracy of our information loops.
I love it. More revenue, less doof. That's the standard practice.
Less
story.
doof.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Well, Phil, thanks so much for coming on Smart Speakers. I think you're a very smart speaker, and we're glad to have had you. And we'll drop links to Standard Practice in the show notes, but it's standardpractice.ai. Phil Markunas, thanks so much for coming on. We're really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks so much. Super happy to be here.
Thanks for listening to Smart Speakers. Our guest for next week is Olivia Moore, partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Olivia has recently released an amazing report on voice AI, covering the state of the market. It's amazing. She makes for a great interview, lots of bird's eye views and very specific views about what's happening with voice. It was super fun to do the interview, and we can't wait for you to hear it. So stay tuned. Thanks, Harish.
Thanks, Dave.
Take care, y'all.